There we go. Okay, there we go. Hello, everyone. My name is Randy Evans, and I'm the Associate Curator of Programs here at the Henry. Thank you for joining us today as part of the opening week celebrating the work of Eric-Paul Riege. It has been thrilling to see so many threads and trajectories of Eric-Paul's work come together this week, from a live artist demo at the Burke Museum to concentrated conversation with UW Native students to the durational performance many of you have witnessed today. And now we have the opportunity to be together to reflect on and learn from the years of planning and collaboration between Eric-Paul and co-curators Nina Bozicnik and Thea Quiray Tagle. I'd like to open our time together by sharing the Henry's land acknowledgement. We at the Henry Art Gallery live and work on the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples and the shared waters of all tribes and bands, named and unnamed, including Suquamish, Duwamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. The land acknowledgement reminds us of our connections, indebtedness, and responsibilities to the peoples and the more than human kin where we live and work. We invite you to join us in paying respects to elders past, present, and future, and to consider what paying those respects means within the work that we do as individuals and within institutional frameworks. Before we get started, a few notes. Nina, Thea, and Eric-Paul will be in conversation for about 40 minutes, and various images from the planning to the presentation of the exhibition, both at the Bell and the Henry, will be on the slideshow behind them. You can see them here. And then we will have time for a short Q&A with the audience. In addition, live AI captioning is provided on the screen, and you can find assisted listening devices on the table outside if you'd like to use them. Now I'll share a little bit more about our guests, and you can see the Henry website for expanded bios. Eric-Paul Riege is a weaver and fiber artist working in collage, durational performance, installation, woven sculpture, and wearable art, using weaving as both means and metaphor to tell hybrid tales that interlace stories from Diné spirituality with his own interpretations and cosmology. He understands his artworks as animate and mobile. His practice pays homage and links him to generations of weavers in his family who aid him in generating spaces of sanctuary. Riege is a member of the Charcoal Streak division of the Red Running Into the Water clan, and he was born and is based in Gallup, New Mexico. Dr. Thea Quiray Tagle is a Filipinx femme curator, writer, and transdisciplinary scholar of visual studies, ethnic studies, and queer studies. Within and between those roles, Thea remains invested in amplifying the world-making potential of installation, photography, performance, and socially engaged art made by BIPOC, LGBTQ+, and immigrant artists and communities. Her arts criticism and academic essays have been published in outlets including Hyperallergic, Freeze, and Bomb magazine. Most recently, Thea was the associate curator at the Bell at Brown University, where she curated exhibitions, performances, residencies, and public programs by artists working across a diverse range of media. Nina Bozicnik is the senior curator at the Henry Art Gallery. She joined the Henry in 2014, and during her 10-year tenure, she has worked extensively with contemporary artists on a national and international scale through commissions and organized exhibitions of loans, as well as works from the Henry collection. Previous to joining the Henry, she was the assistant curator at the Currier Museum of Art in Manchester, New Hampshire, and was the Koch curatorial fellow at the De Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum in Lincoln, Massachusetts. Her curatorial work advances a feminist and queer perspective rooted in questions related to the body, environment, agency, and knowledge production. And I will now turn it over to Nina, Thea, and Eric-Paul.
You're on. Good.
I think so. Yeah.
Thank you, Randy. I really want to thank Randy and our colleague Tanya, who I'm not seeing at this exact moment, but they just helped facilitate that fabulous performance that we all had the privilege to witness. So thank you, Randy and Tanya, for all of that. And thank you, Eric-Paul. Wow. So we're going to root our conversation in what we all just witnessed, because there's so much in what just happened that can spiral into a lot of other themes of your work. So maybe top of mind is, where's your body and your mind after that?
She's done.
I feel great. I've done like a couple talks before. Oops. I've done a couple talks before, like after performance, and I always feel like they feel like a little more genuine, because it kind of, feelings and words kind of just pour out instead of maybe overthinking them a little bit. But I feel great. It's like exercise. So like there's a level of exhaustion, but then there's a level of adrenaline.
Endorphins.
And endorphins go in. Yeah. So, but it's been that way for the past few weeks working with you guys here in person. I've been feeling that every day. So.
Awesome. Well, maybe one of the things that I was observing during the performance was this: at one point, you put yourself under a big bench and just hung out for a little while. And that, in addition to wearing the regalia, cloaking yourself in various ways, I'm curious about thinking about what you're revealing and what you're concealing in the context of your performance.
Yeah, I've always thought that performance for me is this play of inside and outside, and what you share and don't share, what is revealed, what is not revealed. And I was actually inspired by your daughter, Avery, in going to your home and seeing her play and seeing her imagination. And so in some ways this performance was like those levels of, as a child, running and hiding under a table, some levels of maybe hide and seek, I suppose. And so after playing with some of the work, it was a period of separating myself from the audience a little bit for a time of rest, but then also playing with the idea of that itself, some hide and seek. And I think the camera person found me, because I could see them recording me through a little hole, and I was like, I was found. So I revealed myself.
Do you want to pick that up, Thea?
Well, I'm just thinking about, related to this, maybe the hide and seek, and maybe around other kinds of performance and play. Your performances have gotten a lot more draggy and queer over the last couple of years, especially thinking about your show in the fall that we had together at the Bell, where you kind of rode like a cowboy, a piece of string that Ryan Dennison, your collaborator at that time, had done. And then in this show, your affects, your movements, even the videos. And I would just love to think about, alongside you, right?
Yeah.
What you're showing more of, or, moving through in different ways. Even in the performance video that you created for us, for this show, right, where you're the salesperson, right? There's just a different kind of bodily gesture, even from the earlier video where you're not stoic, but she's a little bit scarier.
Yeah.
in those earlier videos,
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
More controlled.
Yeah, there's like a flamboyance that I've like always had, and I've always been inspired by drag and love drag, and I don't consider my performances drag, but they are definitely influenced by you plus. So sometimes drag personas are just an extension of what's already within you. But then when your body gets adorned and your body gets decorated and you get and makeup and hair, in some ways those other parts of you that maybe don't come to the surface as much come out. But then I also think it's I'm getting older, and so I feel more comfortable in my body and sexuality as I age, because I've always been a little gay boy. I'm playing with dolls, my parents taking me to McDonald's and being like, can you get the girl toy for me? I don't want the boy toy. Or
I'll take the boy toy.
I'll take the boy toy. And so, but maybe there was a little bit of shame when I was younger, like when we would go to the store and I wanted a doll, and I would be like, pretend it's for my sister that I don't have. I'd be like, yeah, I want this one for my sister, but it was for me. And so there was always that level of flamboyance and queerness embedded within my things that I like, but I just think as I've gotten older, it's like something that I'm more, not that I wasn't proud of it, but that I'm more proud of it, and it shows through my movements more. Also, Like I've always felt like humor and playfulness in work is something that I like strive for, and so maybe with the movement it becomes a little bit more clear that like the work has a sense of humor, because sometimes without the video or without the performance or without the text involved, sometimes maybe audiences wouldn't necessarily see that immediately. So that gets discovered in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about your work that's always been really funny to me, because I see your wordplay. When I tried to like read these titles, I was trying to be very serious. Like when I didn't know you and I'd see a really long title and I'd try to sound it out, and then I'm like, he's making fun of us. Like it just says, it's it, yeah. Is it, right? Like, duh, you know, but that's funny, yeah. And also because the work is so, it's black and white, it has a monumental scale, there's a way if someone doesn't see an embodiment maybe, or kind of understand the fullness of the picture, there's a way that it can feel very like, this is art, this is very austere. Yeah. And so absolutely, like having the performance videos there and seeing how you are activating the work, yeah, it gives it a very different relational kind of tone and valence. And
yeah, and I always feel like my color palette is in reference to kind of the way museums and institutions look at indigenous objects, and that the more decayed they are, or like as they get a patina, or as they lose their pigment over time, that because it's aged, it's more authentic. And so some of my color choices are because of playing with that back and forth with those attitudes and judgments. But then playing with like plushy, soft fabrics, I feel like there's like an inherent like childlike quality and sensibility that we all hold. Like we all have our favorite stuffed animals. As adults, we have our favorite blankets and pillows. So there's like a level of comfort, and sometimes the museum can be, you know, yeah, austere and intimidating for maybe a person that doesn't necessarily regularly go to museums. And so seeing materials that children respond to provides that level of entry and welcome that I hope my work provides. And beyond that, the ability to touch and feel, I feel is a way for audiences to feel not intimidated by the white walls.
Certainly, and I mean, the other thing that you were just talking about of like a patina kind of imbues, or there's the myth of the patina imbuing some sort of value onto objects, but you are really invested in mark making, like as an accumulation, like the active accumulation of collective mark making. Like in the performance today, you were, you know, taking the jingles and, you know, beating that pedestal, and now there's this, I would call it a drawing based on those performance gestures, and your desire is for that to stay like that, so that there's a trace of that activity. And similarly, you're very invested in us as the audience, leaving the mark of our kind of skin on your work as a collective container of all of this interaction that we've collectively brought to it. So do you want to say more about that aspect of accumulation of mark making?
Yeah, when I was a student at UNM in Studio Art and Ecology, my mentor Suhan Ho, who's a collaborator on the poem work in the exhibition, we were talking once about like the history of material and where you source your materials from. And as I was working with her, I started thinking about the person who raised the sheep, and then the person who washed the sheep, the person who sheared, carded, spun the wool. Maybe this is all the same person, maybe they're all different folks. But then even further, like the person who works at Amazon and has synthetic yarn and has to deliver it to the craft store, the person that works at the craft store and puts it on the shelf. There's so many fingerprints already involved in my material choices before it even gets to me to use in my work. And so I felt like it was irresponsible or unkind of me as a maker to say that as I've been working with museums, I'm the last one that gets to touch it. And if it gets touched by the museum itself, gloves are necessary. And that's not something that I feel, I don't want to end the materials journey. There's already an experience that this object and fiber has gone throughout the world that I don't know. And so I know my experience with it, whether that's in studio or whether that's through performance, but then allowing it to also continue that journey of unknowing for me. So audiences, audiences as they're navigating the world, your fingers get greasy, you get dirt under your fingernails, and when you touch the work, then your experience of that day or the time is now embedded within the piece. And so that memory of your life is now a part of these objects that hold memory. And I like that accumulation in that subtle way, but then also through performances, I see like the dragging of an object or the tearing of an object. A lot of the works in the shows does have like bruises and marks and all times of like, being drug on the ground, so there's dirt. And so you, as a viewer, you can see that this piece has its own experience in its life. And sometimes working with museums, they want objects to be finished and pristine and untouched. And me and my mom always say, as we're like working together, like handmade. Like if we make a mistake, we always just say handmade. To remind ourselves that yes, our hands are making these things, and mistakes sometimes get involved, but it's not produced by a machine. So of course there's going to be these marks and growth over time.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about this iteration of the show, so for folks that don't know, when it was at Brown, right, it's one room, about 2,000 square feet with a small archive room section. The works were in different, obviously, spatial relation to each other, and also a different conversation with works that were borrowed from our anthropology collection versus in this presentation, right, you have those beautiful rugs and dolls from the Burke collection. And so some of the other loans are different too. And one of my favorite things to tie into what you just said about the scars and the bruises is that there's a particular pair of earrings that we could not get for our show because the crates were enormous and very expensive to ship, unfortunately. But they're here, and they're the beautiful pair of very white earrings from the Trotto Bono collection. And when you look and spend time with them, there's lots of fingerprints at the bottom, right? Like black fingerprints from either when you were making them or when you performed them. And I love that because there's a moment, if you see that and don't realize that these works are touchable, right? That could be seen as an act of carelessness, of like, oh my gosh, someone was not wearing gloves, you've gotten it dirty, this pristine thing that belongs to a collector. But in fact, what you're saying is it shows us it's the opposite. It's actually so cared for. Yeah. Your touching is careful, and it's like, done with love, and your invitation to us too to touch works in this show are acts of love and care. And that's one of the things I've so loved about getting to know you and understanding why touch is so important and why these are weaving dances, is because it's such a loving relation that you have and that you invite us to do too. And I did not see, I'm so sad that you actually hairsprayed today, which was an act, that's like conservation and care for your work, and you showed us how you do it.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the hairspray?
Yeah.
What brand? We need to know the brands. This is actually very important.
Tresemme.
Gold.
Ooh la la.
Tresemme Gold, right?
Tresemme Gold.
Extra hold.
Strength 4 out of 5.
Sticky, not too sticky.
Yeah, sticky, not too sticky. Yeah, so when we started working together and told you both that I hairspray the furs in my work to give it a little zhuzh and a little life so it doesn't have bedhead. I wanted to do that today and play with that because that's the act of care that both spaces have done, and then I do at home. But I wanted to show in the performance today that this is one thing that I do to handle the work and feel it. And I feel like the preciousness or the non-preciousness of objects is different dependent on what the object is. But I was thinking specifically like about rugs. And the utilitarian use of a rug oftentimes is for your feet to step on for comfort, or they can also be blankets for warmth, or they can be a doorway, so they're always getting moved and touched and bumped into. And so that's what makes them precious, is because they're being used by your life and your body. And so even today when I took off one of the regalias and started stepping on it, I felt like that was a moment of me, like, yeah, connecting with the work even further, because the basis of that weaving was a gift from my mom's oldest sister, who gave it to me when I was in college, and it was a rug on her floor. And so I was wondering if it missed that part of its life, and so that's why I wanted to have it underneath the pieces as like almost like a frame, and then, or a blanket for the work for me and the work to dance together, or like some sort of stage. But yeah, I see like the objects are more precious, I suppose, because of those marks.
And then another thing that was different today was the collective carrying of the concho belt piece.
Put people to work.
Yeah, exactly, in service of the objects. What was the motivation for that? I mean, and I guess the kind of extension of that being like that, to care for these objects, these materials, these histories, these stories is a collective act that we should all take seriously, even though it's obviously couched in humor and play. But yeah, what were you thinking with that kind of opportunity?
Yeah, that work is a new work commissioned for this show, and so the first time that I performed with it was at the Bell, but the Bell being one large room, I was able to move the piece around by myself by connecting the belts together and dragging them around. But here specifically, with going around corners into different rooms, as soon as I started to do it, I was like, this isn't gonna work, and I looked up and saw someone. I'm wondering if they're in here, the first person I gave it to. But I gave it to a person. They were in front of me, and then yeah, there was like an act of like, you know, of community in this moment together, of carrying this really large concho belt through the spaces to weave the works together in a way. I sometimes like see exhibitions like from the top down. So I was like making like some sort of snake-like, like not snake-like, but like, yeah, I was doing a drawing in my head as I was moving around, and so we were doing a drawing together. But I enjoyed that it was not planned. It was like, I looked up and handed it over. It was, my body kind of did it before my mind thought about it. And then as I started offering it to others, it felt like a gesture, or a gift from them to help in this moment, because I needed help to do this action. So in some ways, the offer was an act of, or a question saying, I need help with this, and I got lots of help today. So that was kind.
Yeah.
I really like your, not return, because you've always been so collaborative, even in the making of your works. We don't have any images here, but you know, so much of the beading and things have been made by your mom. And what do you call your parents? Stuffy and
Zoe and Stuffy.
Zoe and Stuffy. Sorry, I'm giving away all the secrets, but right, like the way you make is actually very deeply collaborative. But in terms of your performance, right, like when you first started performing in school, you did like 2-person performances before you developed this performance persona, but when folks really started seeing your work in other shows, it was very much like a solo performer. And I'm interested in the ways now, again, with this fall collaboration that you did with the Diné, other Diné queer noise artist Ryan Dennison, and in this case, inviting participants to carry along with you. If you think you're gonna maybe continue to grow collaborative performance in your work, or if it'll be a sometimes thing, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like, how are you thinking about collaboration and performance?
Yeah, the collaborations that I did as a student, particularly with my friend Leslie Radosevich and my friend Caitlin Bryson, those were 2 moments that we planned together over the course of like months and rehearsed, and they were really fulfilling in that way. And I kind of fell out. I mean, partly because of COVID, performances kind of like, I didn't do performances for a while, and then when I started performing again, they were just by myself. But then when you extended the invitation for the symposium about ideas of, or about collaborating with different ideas with Ryan, we had always wanted to work together. We had planned on working together at one point, but it was fun in the way of like, I don't use any like audio, video equipment. It's just me and the work, and so we wanted to experiment with including some of his like sound, noise, contact mics. So using that one string that was in the work, we had a piece that was connected to his soundboard and these contact mics, and we strung it all the way across the room, and I was running back and forth, and Ryan was moving with them, and so it created like, it was allowing the work to sing in a different way. Because when I perform, I'm performing with the object directly and banging it on the ground or bumping into it and spinning it around, but that was cool that like the objects got to sing with this equipment, like amplifying their sound. But I've always wanted to be a part of some sort of like procession or some sort of like parade, and have multiple performers involved. That's just something that's always been on my mind to have with you know, a large group of folks. And so it is something on the, not on the near horizon, but it's a seed of an idea that I've had for a long time.
And it'll happen.
Yeah, I mean, I call all my performances weaving dances, so I do see them as collaborative anyways with all the work, but like, yeah, more dances. Dancing boys dance.
The other thing that I was really noticing, well, a couple of things. There was this moment where this incredible piece, this long piece is hanging in what we call our rotunda. It's like you made the piece for that location, although that's not true. So it's just like a match made in heaven. But you were spinning it in this circular motion. And this is a durational performance. You kind of end where you begin. So there's a lot about cyclicality, the notion of time not necessarily being linear, but that you are continuously returning to something. And I think that has a lot to do also with how you think of accumulation of marks. It's time is, you know, the future and the past are in the present together. And there was this beautiful moment where in the beginning of the performance, you took Roland, who is your alter ego, future ancestor, son doll, and carried him into the room that Thea was referring to as like the archive room, and were kind of attending to your matrilineal ancestors, your grandmother and your great-grandmother. So I guess maybe the question there is how you relate to the sense of time and how, the past lives in the present.
Yeah, as I move through the space in performance, I do have this idea of like beginning where you end. I think about the loom often, and so the loom is a cyclical place for weaving. So as the weaving is finished and unrolled and taken down, then it's not a place of the loom. You know, it's a place of the loom being at rest for a period of time, but then it's rebirth when it gets set up again. And so my relationship with the loom and weaving is always cyclical, and that's the purpose of having these tools and these objects. And my work is a lot about the beauty of the tool, maybe not necessarily the finished product, but of the sounds and the extensions of the hands. And so I see the loom as the cyclical place of making, and because of that, I do think of like my relationship to time as cyclical. And so when Roland was born, so the title of the show is Oho Roland. Roland is this character in my work that was born in 2019. First he began as a headdress, and I was thinking of like creativity in some ways, and imagination is like, you know, our brain is like the womb for our creativity. And so he began on my head and the womb of my mind, and then became my son, and he's in a cradle board, and I said bye to him the other day. I said I'll be back in a few days. But then there's another version of here in this show, so then when I saw him again, I was like, hello again. But there's technically two dolls, but it's the same figure. But then now I see him maybe as more of like my age, and then in the future, like you said, like an ancestor, an elder. And so his name is also for the fourth person term for something to exist or to be in Diné in Navajo language. And it was a way for me to, I've had him with my grandmother and great grandmother in performances before, meet and have conversations. But is my microphone still working? Is it? Can you hear me? Oh, okay. I couldn't hear myself for a second. But to have these conversations before in performance, and also in studio, where they, oh, no, that one's blowing out the speaker. But where they, yeah, get to know that there's a place for, you know, this mutual existence on whatever plane that they exist now. And so in some ways too, the looms act as like that place for, if they ever want to visit, there's always a space for them to weave. But Halant being a word about existence, and me speaking to these ancestors that are no longer here with us in this plane, it was a way of saying hello.
Yeah, beautiful. It was a stunning moment, very affecting. And before you propose another question over there, Thea, I just want to say that in the slideshow you will see a couple iterations of Halant. I think we put a few of those images, not just the one that's in the show, so you can keep an eye out for the evolution from little baby to
and in the rug
adult.
wall, there's first family photo too that my mom took in our old driveway. So there's
Yeah.
different versions of him in that wall as well.
Yeah, awesome. Go ahead.
Yeah, thinking
Here, do you want this one?
thinking about space-time and watching now some of the footage of these very archival interventions that you did, both here at the Henry and then also at Brown. One of the things that I'm really excited that we got to do together for this show, I mean, this is the first time that you've done kind of a longer form like research-based work, especially in conversation with an archive. And not that you're resurrecting these objects because they are alive and of themselves, right? But what you've done, even in terms of intervening into collecting or storage practices of places like the Hafenreffer, is bringing these objects, right, back to a different kind of use value that they haven't had for a long time. And I'm wondering if, yeah, maybe you can talk a bit about just overall how spending time with the Burke archives and now activating them, again in today's performance and also previously with the Hafenreffer archives, how maybe that kind of has shifted for you the way that you're moving with objects or thinking about objects into the future.
Yeah, when I did both of those visits with both of you over the past few years, a lot of these objects and entities are charged with so much history, and so the seed kind of began with the one particular comb, and then I began thinking specifically about how these objects are meant to be used. They're an extension of the hand. They're for not only cultural survival, but for physical survival. So cultural survival in that they weave our stories into these looms and into these weavings, but then physical survival and these objects and pieces then being sold to feed yourself and to feed your family. And so again, that's like a cyclical thing to me. So when they enter these spaces, particularly the tools, I saw them in some ways as like being an unplayed instrument or being buried alive. And so even the other day when Randy and Tanya were with one of the Diné students, and she saw the doll that's under the glass case, and she was so affected by it not being played with and touched, and she was like, I have similar dolls at home with the same sort of dress and regalia that I played with as a young person, and she was like, this makes me want to like go back and play again, but this doll is unable to get played with because it's under this plexi. I see objects as charged in that way and holding on to memory for us. But as I was working with the archive today and the way of play and performance, I also wanted to, and with the intervention with the writing, I wanted them to maybe in some way like have a conversation with me. So I used one of the rug, or both of the rugs, as this like carpet for like Hot Wheels toys, and navigated the piece in its pattern by moving this toy around. In a way of using the rug in a different way, so then that way it could, you know, be played with again. So while there was this playing between them with the plexi, it got to be, you know, come to life with the level of play.
Yeah, and maybe to bring it not back around to where we started, but the question around revealing and concealing, and this idea of the plexi as this kind of mediator between the audience and the object, and how one handles these objects. You in performance, you know, that's kind of histories of display, the presentation of indigenous cultures within museums, within, you know, these institutions. And here you're kind of wanting to revise those histories, or at least create a conversation with those past. Are you consciously kind of contending with that and wanting to needle that? I think you said the other day you were poking at these histories. So that's like very apparent in the installation, but in performance, how are you thinking through those deeply challenging histories?
Yeah, I consider the body of work not necessarily a critique of these ideas, but then more so a questioning. And so with questioning, that led me to think more about like jokes and humor and poking fun. I wanted to, you know, poking fun and teasing is a way of also showing that you care, and that you are embodying some sort of you know, level of understanding of the other. And so I think of that plexi and that glass as this like place of this border that I like to dig at. The plastic weaving work in some ways is my like toy version of the plexi. So when I started working with different institutions, I started accumulating a lot of plastic, and when my work was sent back to me, it was so beautifully wrapped and cared for. And then I started thinking about rugs again and what they're used for, and they're used for warmth and care. And so I was like, this plastic is like a rug for the rug. And so then I started saving them, and I have those big sheets of plastic in the show. And then when I deemed it as valuable or as an art piece, then more plastic got put on it. So it was like, it became very meta. It was like, okay, now this is art, so now we need to protect it with more plastic when it gets sent. And I just thought that was like this, again, this cyclical way of thinking about the, you know, authorship of value because of the way it's presented, and plexi does that. So I also thought it would be funny one day to put the plastic behind a plexi. And yeah, I feel like glass and oftentimes vitrines and shelves and cases create this level of value that acts as making the object maybe more authentic or more indigenous, because it is under this case. Because that's oftentimes in museums, when you do see native objects, it's because it's in an anthropological setting, it's in a natural history museum, and so you know, a lot of the objects are behind these cases where there's a barrier between us as viewers and audiences, and you know, like I said, these objects are often meant to be used, and they were often stolen from communities. And the art, while it is cared for behind these glasses, oftentimes the artist is often ignored, and so you'll see a lot of these objects saying "artist unknown" or "artist once known," and so the maker often loses the identity with the work that they do. And so yeah, I think of plexi and glass and cases as really charged in what they provide for viewers and showing what is deemed important. I talk often about Gallup, New Mexico, where I am born and raised, and the pawn and trade shops there. There's oftentimes objects that are under these cases where there's typically a non-native owner of those shops. There's only one native-owned native jewelry shop in Gallup, but most of them are non-native owned. And so when you're going to these spaces, they're yeah, right here. This was from your guys' trip down to Gallup, and yeah, in these spaces, they're not the work is presented in a way of like lots of layering, but then as you read like different like reviews of like tourism in Gallup, they often name these shops as getting the most real authentic native jewelry or native art or native rug. But oftentimes when you're at a restaurant and people are selling work table to table to you, those reviews on Google reviews or Yelp reviews often describe those objects as like a little bit more janky or not real or yeah, tacky or costume jewelry. But you're buying directly from the maker, but maybe because they don't go through those avenues like the pawn and trade shop doesn't make their work less valuable because it's now sitting on your table and it's not under a glass case. Or at like a market, like a flea market. Those are viewed as differently than the ones that are in the stores.
And I know we're going to open it up to the audience super soon. And maybe to bring us to another kind of full circle, thinking about how you play so much with your material choices, with your deconstructed beanie babies. I'm still sad about that one. Oh, that's a separate thing. No, the one that the beautiful puppet that you deconstructed for your headpiece.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, not that one, she's so beautiful. But you needed it. But just the way that you're mixing materials and, you know, the high and the low. One of my favorite interventions that you continue to make when you're writing on the plexiglass is your inclusion of pop songs, like a Sophie pop song title for the presentation at the Bell. And then this one, you've got Donna Summers and the Spice Girls. So this is the most important question of the day. Pay attention, everyone. Who is your favorite Spice Girl? Because you did not write that on the plexi.
My favorite Spice Girl, when I was a kid, Baby Spice. But as an adult, they're all equally as important. They're like one of the first, I think, girl groups where each one has their own distinct, personality, but then they also have different skill levels of their voice. I do think the best singer is Mel C, though. And yeah, I wanted to include these references of pop and pop culture within the work. Like even in the rug wall, there's a photograph of Robert Pattinson's hair on a red carpet. That's like disguised, and then the font of some of the words is in Brat Doll font. I wanted to include these pop culture references because thinking about, again, native art, oftentimes we're written about as if we're in the past or if we're not experiencing life like the rest of us, or that our stories and our creations are boxed in being traditional. And so I wanted to play a little bit with my references in the world and where I get inspiration from, those being ones that like I grew up with, but then also ones that I still like embody now. And yeah, I particularly with the glass, the plexis, I wanted to highlight some of that, but then I also wanted to highlight too Stephanie Yellowhair, who was an amazing trans woman, and she was on an episode of Cops in the 90s, where the cops were being really demeaning and rude to her. But then she became like one of the first native trans women in pop culture to get to, I guess, become a meme, but then also become this like local celebrity. And so one of her like famous phrases was "Excuse my beauty," and so I wanted to put that on the doll as a shout out to her, R.I.P. But I wanted to include some of these references of like contemporary life that I feel like Native folks oftentimes don't get to show within their, or the museum doesn't want Native folks to show this within their work. Like I saw a critique of this beaded like SpongeBob piece that it was that someone had like said like, why is this in a Native art museum? Like SpongeBob isn't Native, but like I was like, you don't know that. Yeah, that showing like, you know, we're still here. Some of us are queer, but we're everywhere. And yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
both.
Yeah.
Yes. We will open it up to questions. Tanya and Randy have some mics and will be coming around. Okay, we can start with you in the front.
Hello.
Hello? Okay, it's not my fault. Is this working?
Yep.
Good, okay. I've loved everything of yours that I've seen. I wasn't able to be here today for the performance, but I was very interested in your written work and what I saw on the wall. And I didn't realize you had a collaborator until you, would you talk a little bit about that? What prompted it, how you do it, what was going on in your head? That's my question.
Yeah, I don't normally work with language. But my mentor in school, Suhan Ho, I took a performance class with her, and she completely changed the way that I saw art and embodied art and creativity within my life. And it's why I do performance with really every project that I get invited to. But I wanted to do a writing collaboration with her because she also taught an experimental writing class. And I didn't want the writing for this one catalog to be necessarily like super academic or like didactic of what like the work meant. I like telling stories about my work, but I feel like as an artist, when you reveal your work to the public, other people's interpretations of what you do is just equally as true or important as your own. And so I wanted to have this collection of poems to be a representation of the work that one looked like it, that maybe sounded like it. And so we called it beading and weaving. And so we were sending phrases and words and sentences back and forth to one another. So a certain story that she wanted to share, then if that reminded me of a story within my life, then I would share that, and then we started like collaging them together. And Navajo language is really cool in the way it gets beaded together. And so when you conjugate a verb, oftentimes they're like broken into sections. And those sections of the verb are like, you know, can be one letter and then 3 letters, but then once those like change, the entire verb can reference a whole different situation or a whole different group of folks. And so I liked that Navajo is like built up in this like beaded form. And so the poem in some ways is that. And so some sentences are a combination of words between her back and forth, and then maybe the next line is like a sentence of mine, and then a sentence of hers, and then we design them around the cross symbol that's used oftentimes in indigenous cultures, but particularly in Diné culture, in weavings. It's used as a place of representative of Spider Woman, who's our holy figure that introduced weaving, but then it also is representative of stars. So when it's more of like of a landscape weaving, stars, or the crosses can also be stars, but then also, I have some right here, like four directions and the four mountains, and so you see it a lot in Diné weaving that way. But we wanted the poems to look like that in a way. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they were a layering of stories. It wasn't one continuous story, it's lots of stories in those poems.
Hi. Thank you so much for...
Hi, Miranda.
Hi. Hi. Thank you for describing your process and everything, and there's so much to talk about. There's so much to go into these rabbit holes with you all about. But something that is very striking to me is when you were talking about the plexiglass being charged as a site of a barrier or even a borderland. And so thinking of Gallup as a borderland and border town, and the way that the surrounding communities all flood into Gallup in the weekends. You know, if I forget and I go on the 1st of the month, I'm like, dang it. But I'm already here, so I might as well get my stuff. And, and so then, but thinking about how it holds that tension and the ways that you are writing and annotating on there. And there's this move in information institutions, because I teach about information institutions of tribal, I mean, mostly tribal, but also museums, libraries, and archives, as sites of contested knowledge and sets of knowledges. And so to think about this move towards reparative cataloging and seeing what the artist thinks, what the community thinks about the records that are inside of the catalog. Most of the time, they have artist unknown, you know, or artist once known is the more gentler move that we're moving towards. But can you talk a little bit more about the evolution of how you're doing that, and if you're documenting that, and if you're pushing towards how you're thinking about institutions, thinking about your annotations as you go through and view those archived pieces, the pieces that belong to, we know sometimes where they come from, sometimes we don't, but we recognize them as ours and they recognize us as theirs. And so can you talk a little bit about that process of working with the institutions? They said that this is a new part of your process, but how do you imagine this going forward?
Yeah, it's this project is the first time that I've worked with a collection and archive. The first one that I got invited to was at the Montclair Art Museum, and I was doing a project with the curator Laura Allen there, and she had warned me before and told me that, like, you know, some folks, as they see our archive, which is mainly of native baskets, that's how the museum started. It was like a donation of all these baskets, and then the museum kind of grew from all these native baskets. She had told me that, like, you know, sometimes entering a space like this can be really uncomfortable for folks, and I had never gone into a collection like that, and I was like, oh, I'm excited to see the work, but as soon as I went in, my stomach dropped and I felt uncomfortable. And as I was shared that story with you guys, and I was unsure of why of that, but I was like, I kind of want to investigate why I'm having these feelings. I feel like, yeah, like it's a good, when you feel uncomfortable, maybe going down that path of wanting to discover why is a good place to, you know, a lot of food for thought for thinking. And so then I saw the work of Tanya Lucan Linklater and a piece that she did with an archive in California. I'm not sure what museum it was, but where there was this choreography and movement through the collections and through the drawers and dancing with your ancestors through the objects that were there and the entities that were there. I saw that work, and then I thought about my experience, and then working with Thea, and then you sharing that Brown had a collection of Diné objects with the Hoffenreffer, and then knowing that the Burke was here, I was like, I want to, yeah, let's see why I'm feeling these things. And so I feel like a body of work this body of work in some ways is my answer, not necessarily an answer, is my way of working through those things. So I'm not someone that documents in terms of language. I document in terms of making. I'm not a writer, I'm a maker. And so I feel like the work there is one that, yeah, the work with the archive is one that I want to continue to pursue, and I think like the interventions that I did through the writing on the case, and then the playing with of them as like toys, and the recreations as in some ways toys, because I was like, you know, I started thinking about like pop culture again, and like why are things in pop culture, you know, not why are things in pop culture, but pop culture often has toys and action figures made after them, and I saw those weavings as superheroes to me. And so I was like, superheroes get clothes and toys and dolls made after them. And so the recreations for me was like thinking of them as like the superhero that's at a distance, but then a superhero that looks like me and feels like me. And so a lot of the body of work was me creating those like toys, the collectible version of them. I'm not sure if that answered the question entirely, but that's kind of like where my thoughts are as I've been like navigating. And in the future, I would like to work more in thinking about like particularly the tools, so particularly the combs and the battens, the ones that get handled a lot, and the ones that I see mainly as like instruments. Like they all have their song that they want to sing. So I want to particularly in the future work more with those tool-like objects.
One thing I wanted to think about too, even to your question, Miranda, moving forward, is there is a third part to all of the three of ours and our institutions work together, which is an upcoming artist book, and it's not meant as a catalog or like a catalog raisonné that's like going to give you this whole origin story. It is meant as its own standalone conversation, right? Thinking through these particular interventions that you've made, maybe playing with language and play. We work with a really amazing catalog designer named Caleb Kane Marcus, and he loves a book and he loves working directly with artists. And there's something that we've been talking about the transparency and opacity of what you can see and not see that can extend what Eric-Paul's been doing on the plexiglass in a book form. And then also extending, again, the timeline of reciprocity and co-creation, right? So there are contributions, can't say who, but someone made a score for Eric-Paul, right? And another artist, two artists that like you've worked with who kind of gave you opportunities when you were coming up, right, or being included, and you're giving opportunities to others now that you're moving forward in your career, right? And so I feel like that's another kind of avenue through a book form of, again, pushing back against so much of the anthropological impulse to collect, to catalog, to classify, to fix between, you know, two pages as this stable thing. Like, I think there's a really great opportunity in that mode to like transform what a book is or what an artist's book is, and to make it something that is not as flexible or as soft as your soft sculptures, but that, right, can challenge again what we think we understand or can understand or apprehend about Indigenous contemporary art.
Yeah, there we go.
All right. I think we have time for one more or two more. Oh, okay, more questions.
I was kind of wondering about like more like the technical creation behind your art, because a lot of them are like really enormous, super impressive. Like that's not just something you paint on like a canvas. So, and I was also reading like the list of materials. Like there's like fabric, and then there's like human blood. So could you like go into like a little bit of that? Like how do you create your works and how do you bring them to life?
Yeah. Yeah, the human blood is because I poke myself a lot. As I'm sewing, and I'm sewing, doing an assembly line of sewing. Like my finger, particularly this finger, can get really calloused, and so sometimes the needle will poke through the callus, and then the work inherently just gets blood on it. And so I saw enlisting the human blood that like. There's probably a lot of little specks here and there from the various times that I poke myself throughout the week making. But as I'm like, you know, thinking about a future project, I often like unmake and remake a lot of my work. And so while this is a new body of work, like if there's like specific parts sometimes that I've made like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a year ago, and so I, in the way of disassembling and unmaking and destroying, I feel like there I learn a lot about like the dexterity of the material and the integrity of my craftsmanship as well. And so that's another way of me to learn about being a better maker is the unmaking of it. And so, yeah, I think about like assembly lines when I'm making. And so if you're a person that works in fiber, oftentimes like what comes first is like the pattern sketching and then the cutting of the pattern and then so there's just like all these assembly lines. And so sometimes at home I'll set up like little stations. I'm lucky now to have I live with my family, we live in a duplex, but in the back apartment now is my studio, and so I'm lucky to have a larger space where I can set up these like little zones of making. And so like one of them would be like, yeah, just cutting the circles of fabric. Another one will be set up for the sewing machine, and so I like work in these different spaces. And then my family helps me a lot, like you said, sewy and stuffy. And so when I have 100, 200, 300 beads to sew, my mom will sometimes help me sew the ends, or if there's objects that need to get stuffed, my dad will help put the cotton or the polyfill inside. And so they definitely, their hand crafts or the craft of their hands is embedded in the work, and I can tell the difference between our seams, and so that's always fun, particularly the work that's in the room. It's called Let the Holy People Watch Over You and Me, and it's with the room with the two earrings. It's a beaded piece, but if you go behind it, you can see all the seams. And so I like looking at that piece from behind because I can see my seam, I can see my mom's seams, I can see my cousin Michaela's seams. I can like tell the difference between who had made them or who had helped me make them.
And it's like the modularity of the work is both like practical as well as like deeply embedded in your idea of making and remaking and assembly, and like the cyclicality again of materials, like continuously taking on new life. And to Thea's point before about like the unfixed kind of form, that the modularity really allows you to explore that in your sculptural pieces. But also I love that it is also a contingency that's necessary for the purposes of space that you're working within, and that some of these like you actually don't see assembled until you're on site at a museum or at wherever you're installing the work.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, we also need to think about the gallery as studio space, because one thing that was shocking, not shocking, was that you're hand sewing everything, including those really heavy pleather pieces and segments of the comb, and that for whatever reasons, I'm not gonna say time management, but you were also assembling and making pieces inside the gallery during install. So like being able to see that from a curatorial perspective is incredible, just in like I can't believe you're hand sewing this. Where is your machine / where are your 5 studio assistants? Because it's so much work, like labor with your hands that you're physically doing to make all of this incredible work on relatively compressed timelines. And then the other piece really is thinking about how out of necessity or desire, like politically or whatever, it is a collective effort, right? Of bringing in sometimes a grad student to finish beading something, or your family to do it, right? To see it through.
And so, sometimes it is that modularity where when it's in a space, I don't have 14, 15-foot ceilings in my home, and so oftentimes things are sent in these segments or in these parts, and so in putting them together, that's like just an inherent part of the process of what I do, that things can always be broken down into like their individual parts. And so I think that way about like jewelry in general. If you have a necklace that's like beaded, and if you cut it, it returns to its parts. And so in making the work, oftentimes I think of them as each individual object or each individual part of a piece is just one of the beads, and so the beads can always be rebeaded into something new. but yeah, like each time artist gets to work in a new space, there's an excitement when you get to change the work to adapt to that space. So like the piece in the rotunda now is able to exist as one large object, whereas when it was at the Bell, the ceilings there were not tall enough, and so because my work is in segments, we were able to have them as two objects, but that didn't mean that it was like they were not finished or it wasn't the whole object. And so I don't see maybe pieces necessarily as whole in a way. I always see them as the individual parts. There's a line in the poem where I said not the object but the things in between them, and so that's often where I come to, or my philosophy when I come to thinking of an idea for a piece or a project.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Eric-Paul.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
thank you. I think so. I think
That's
we're
a
at
beautiful way
time
to leave it,
today.
in the liminality,
Yeah.
in the in-between.
Well, thank you both. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Yeah.